we're going to give you some look aheads, just, likes or leans that we have for Thursday or Friday. Some of these numbers have just popped really in the last 12 hours. I like BYU. You talked about them in their matchup against Alabama. They're plus 170 on the money line right now. This is the official Greg Waddell approved pick. Greg welcomes the second child to his family this week, and he posted that on social media. I'm shocked, given how much heavy lifting he's done for BYU in the last 6 weeks, that he did not name the kid Joseph Smith Waddell. But there's still time for him to at least throw on a nickname if BYU goes all the way to the national championship, I should say. Since February 10th, BYU 11-1 straight up, only loss coming to Houston in the Big 12 tournament. In that window, they're ranked 4th per Torvik, and notably number 1 in the entire country on the offensive end. Before that run, they were 6-6 in Big 12 play. They seemed like just an also-ran in the Big 12. And a big issue that they had offensively is that they were so reliant on the perimeter shot. They shot so much better in Provo than they did on the road. And what did they do during this 12-game run? Well, they started attacking the hoop. They went from 291st in foul shot rate to cracking the top 170. And while that may not sound all that impressive, when you balance it out with what they're able to do offensively on the perimeter, it's really stabilized their scoring. So no matter what you're doing against them defensively, it seems like they're always scoring in the 80s. And now they're going to play an Alabama team that, as we all know, they're number 1 in tempo across all metrics. They're going to push the tempo. And for most teams playing against Alabama, that pulls them out of their comfort zone. Not the case with BYU. BYU can win this game in the 80s or 90s, which is, a nice advantage for them in terms of stylistic basketball. They can win in a multitude of ways. And when you look at how they handled the 3 up-tempo teams in the Big 12, that was UCF, Oklahoma State, and Arizona, they went 3-1 straight up and 3-1 against the spread. So I feel very confident. I would take the points here at 4.5 or 5, certainly take the money line. I also think Alabama, in terms of speeding teams up, you look at other teams that they played that were up-tempo in the SEC. They swept Kentucky. That was great. But they also got swept by the Gators. Now, obviously, this is elite competition. But as I mentioned at the top, for the last 6 weeks, BYU has been an elite top 5-ish kind of team. And then finally, in terms of strategy, BYU is going to be able to throw a little bit of zone at Bama. They're top 50, rate zone defense in the entire country. But that makes things interesting, and it brings in the shot volume and the variance monster to a certain degree, because they're going to say, Bama, go ahead, shoot 35 threes. Now, if they make 12 plus, it's probably the Crimson Tide. If they don't, if they make single-digit triples, but they fire up that many, all of a sudden, the math and the defensive stops start really working in the Cougars, favor in that game. So in terms of the price, I think that's the best you're going to do in terms of an outright dog winning here in the Sweet 16. What are your thoughts on the matchup in terms of a side between the Mormons and the Crimson Tide?
Yeah, I'm with you. I'm a BYU guy. I honestly wish the line was a little higher. I thought we were going to get the 5.5 of St. Mary's, but 4.5 currently sitting there. Honestly, I had considered the under. I just don't know if I have the guts at the moment to do it. And I kind of think till Thursday, it's just going to get bet up. But, I would consider it 175, and just so many things need to go right for it to go over, but we've seen every Alabama game, so we get it. The other 2 dogs interest me are Michigan and Arkansas. I'm a Texas Tech guy, but I just think Arkansas at 5.5 is an interesting number. I think the pace they run at is kind of interesting, and I think Texas Tech sometimes can get into lulls. And Michigan is honestly is interested me, especially because Golden's played well. I had Creighton. Turns out wasn't the right side, but for a while it felt like, I was kind of onto something, and Auburn, again, hadn't looked great recently, even though playing much better competition. I just feel like, again, 7.5, it's a little high for me in that game, especially considering Michigan's playing really, really well lately. So it's not something I would stay away from. The other one I think I like about BYU, going back to one nugget there, they've also really played well in kind of toss-up games. So understood that this isn't in that spot, but either as an underdog or favorite of 3 points or less. 7-1 straight up in ATS last 8 games. So basically when they're in the mix, I think it's a good number. So I'm interested there with BYU with you.
In terms of the Arkansas-Texas Tech matchup, and as I'll continue to say for our audience, we're going to do the full deep dive this week between Stuck, Greg Waddell, and myself. But when you just look at the coaching, all of a sudden in one weekend, and this happens very often during March Madness, the narrative around Calipari having issues in the tournament, having issues sometimes making in-game adjustments. He's more of a roster creation management kind of guy. He gets the kids in there, lets them play, sometimes can make defensive adjustments, but on the offensive end, if it's not working, it's not working. And then you also look at the fact that Boogie Fland was out. Seemingly they played better, addition by subtraction. But then it reverses. He comes back to the lineup. There was concerns how he would mesh someone who hasn't come off the bench, I think they said, since junior high. And all of a sudden he's playing, and it just looks like a bonus for them. In terms of the coaching and the Boogie Fland element, how do you balance those up against a Texas Tech coaching staff that has really shown that they're adept at preparing for different kinds of teams, different looks on the defensive end throughout the entire season, particularly in Big 12 play?
I mean, I think the Flam play is good back into the lineup. My thing with Calipari is it's pretty simple. I just trust him in this spot, even though we've seen Texas Tech have some sort of success in the tournament at times, especially lately. I mean, their defense is very, very difficult to deal with. But I kind of like Arkansas's size. And I also kind of think that the SEC element here as getting points, especially, 5.5, and I think that could go up. I just think I trust Calipari in this spot later in the tournament, especially, and I have to look into it a little bit more, but I do think the prep time probably gives Calipari a little bit of an edge there, which I kind of like. And I think making it out of this side of the bracket and then having a week to kind of set up for your next tournament, which is the way all the coaches kind of deal with this, I think has an advantage there. So that's one reason I would point to Arkansas. But again, I would, probably just touch the 5.5. I think at the moment there's a chance it does get a little higher as we're kind of talking here Monday morning, Sunday night. But at least initially, that's probably where I would lean.
Now, Stuck likes to say there's different criteria that you can put out year over year. This is essentially the grouping that the national champion will come out of. You look at KenPom, you look at top 25 offenses, top 25 defenses, as well as do they have a star NBA player or at least one that projects well in the upcoming NBA draft. Maryland is there. They're top 25 on both ends of the floor. Derek Queen just had his legacy game. He hits the game winner against Colorado State. He was calling for the ball. And Kevin Willard, who until this run during March Madness had certainly struggled to rack up wins. I believe he entered with 2 career NCAA tournament wins. Now all of a sudden he's matched that in one tournament run. Where are you on the Terps, the Crab 5, to potentially continue this run and upset Florida in the Sweet 16?
I thought Florida was vulnerable when they faced UConn. I mean, I tended to like the 9.5 points, and I just think Florida has some cracks in them, and I think the line was inflated against UConn. Now, I think this Maryland team kind of got a scare, and I think that scare might have done them well, as it tends to do. I think that's something interesting to probably look at, a little bit of history, and I probably will behind, you can look at buzzer beaters, you can look at close finishes, but I think a team like that, and I liked Maryland to potentially go to the Final Four. I took them at like 9-1 before they played this game. And I still got lucky there, obviously, to advance, but I think they have a chance against Florida. Now, the line, it actually has just started moving as we're talking about this, as it just moved to 6. So it's at 6 right now, which is telling you that Maryland has a shot here. I mean, it's not 8.5, it's not 9. So to me, I would have liked a bigger line. So, I mean, in terms of the current bet on the game, I think it's a little tough. I think you're probably right on there. But I do like Maryland, but I liked UConn, and we got close. We just didn't finish. I think the line's probably right there.
Another random travel quirk to consider here. Maryland sent out to Seattle to play. Now they're going to stay on the West Coast and play in San Francisco against, this Florida Gator team, whereas the Gators have to travel across the country, having played in Raleigh. Just an interesting thing to consider, how bodies acclimate, how they essentially can kind of settle in a little bit to the West Coast. We'll see if that comes up at all. Certainly elements like that can be overplayed, but at least with 2 East Coast teams, one already having the advantage and being the underdog in terms of already being out there, just something to consider.
Yeah.
Any other matchups in the Sweet 16 of the 8 that caught your eye, even, an angle on a total or player prop, perhaps?
Honestly, I'll go back to, and I said it before we went into the read, but Kentucky, Tennessee is going to get a lot of look. Just for the fact that Kentucky beat them twice, now an underdog in the game. And I actually looked it up. So back to the seeding era, like 79, 78, there is no game with conference foes where one team beat another team twice and then was listed as an underdog in the tournament. So this is legitimately brand new stuff here we are dealing with, because Tennessee is better, but for some reason they couldn't figure out Kentucky this year. So I think analyzing that matchup and figuring out, is it worth the 4.5 points, is an interesting factor, especially with, everyone talks about Barnes doesn't cover. Well, he's 1-1 right now. So we'll see how that goes. But yeah, laying 4.5 again. So we will see.